Okay, good afternoon. So today we are in for a treat. As always, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for the day. Please remember to keep your chat open, and we'll have a Q&A maybe during the presentation. If not, make sure you have your questions ready for the end so we can have a Q&A after. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Anna Bermudez, who is the Chief Curator at the Museum of Ventura County in Ventura, California. Her interests are in researching the history of the Mexican American community, specifically in the areas of food, culture, and recreation. She has received various awards for her work from organizations such as the Latino Town Hall, the Mexican Consulate, and the City of Ventura. She has co-authored 3 books on Mexican American baseball with her friend and colleague, Dr. Jose Alamillo, Dr. Richard Santillan. She continues to work on a cookbook of Mexican American recipes. Can't wait for that. She is currently working for the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History as a West Coast researcher on the food production and distribution during the pandemic. She is also working with the Smithsonian's Latino Center on researching artifacts for the opening of the Molina Family Gallery, the first national Latino gallery on the National Mall. That is amazing. Bienvenida, amiga. Thank you for being here with us. So excited to have you.
Thank you, amiga. Thank you and hello to everyone. I hope you all have your snacks with you today. You might get a little hungry during this session. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So I'm going to share my screen. Keep your fingers crossed this is going to work. Let's see. All right.
Yep, there it is. We see it.
Right. Let me start from the beginning. We'll do. Do I have to do slideshow? No, I guess, is that okay like that?
Oh, you see the very, very bottom on your right, the one that looks like a little TV on a stand?
Oh, yeah. That's it right there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so Mexican immigration and how it changed foodways in Ventura County. Oh, let's see. Foodways, what a big word. Oh my gosh. So very popular right now. So what are foodways? So in social science, the cultural, social, and economic practices relating to the production and consumption of food. By the way, this is one of the only maybe 2 screens that I'm going to read to you. The rest is going to be kind of, what I have to say. So the Urban Dictionary describes a foodway as not only the things that people do and do not eat, but why we eat them or not. Not to mention the traditions and history that help define the culture. So just a little bit of background. So what is Mexican cooking? So one of the first books that I ever read was a book called Recipe of Memory. It's by Victor Valle. And it began my kind of love of food history. I knew that I loved food from early on. I can remember meals that I had. It freaks my husband out, but I can remember meals that I had when I was 4 years old. It's very strange and related to certain celebrations or just certain episodes in my life. But Victor Valle said that in Mexican recipes that were found early in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century are all hybrids. They're kind of a mix of European influence and indigenous ingredients, which I think we all knew. From Europe, you get that influence of French and Spanish dishes with some Moroccan influence thrown in. And then from Mexico, you have the indigenous ingredients and styles used by the servants to the Spanish housewives, the cooks that were Indians, African, and mestizos. And while the upper classes may have said that they loved European cooking, they really liked la comida de la gente better, which is the mestizo food, or the food that the cooks served or ate. I mean, we call it street food now, I guess. It's what we would call it. But so what are some of those French influences? Well, if any of you like flan, or I grew up with my mom didn't make flan, she made custard. They would always put it in the oven in a pan that had water in it. That's called a bain-marie in French, or baño Maria in Spanish. It's a Mary's bath. And it's something that was developed in the 1st or 2nd century AD by this woman that was known as Mary the Jewess, and she was an alchemist, and she was a badass woman. So she created this bain-marie. So you put your little flans or the big flan in a container. and then you put it in a pan in the oven. You fill it about halfway full of water, and then you bake it. So that's something that we got from the French influence. What else? Well, something very easy, French rolls, bolillos, as we know them. They're fantastic. I love them. That was definitely brought to us from the French. And sauces, tomato-based sauces that we use for our potatoes that we dip in egg batter during Lent. Those kinds of tomato sauces, those are all French influenced. And white sauces like chiles rellenos en nogada, the white sauce that has that taste of nutmeg. Those are all, that's like a bechamel sauce from France. So these are all the things that we got from different countries that were brought in by the Spanish colonists. And then the Moroccan influences, pomegranates, garbanzo beans, that kind of thing. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that later on. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I looked at the other lectures that were going, your Zoom lectures that were going on, and I noticed that people were talking a little bit about themselves. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I'm here today. So my mother and my father's family both came from Guanajuato, from the village of Chichimequillas in the municipality of Silao. My mom's family left there just before the revolution in 1907. My grandfather was a chauffeur for a very wealthy family. My grandmother was very, very poor, and she and her mother did catering and cooking for weddings and baptisms and that kind of thing. So when he met her, they got married. They ended up having 6 children and decided that they wanted to get out of Dodge. So they left in 1907, and on June 6th, 1907, they paid 3 cents to cross the border at El Paso on the EPE, the El Paso Electric Railway. My grandfather started looking for work right away. He had a lot of mouths to feed. So he found work as a traquero, a railroad worker in so they sent him to Clearwater, Kansas. So basically it's a section hand. Traqueros were section hands working on the railroad. And in English slang, they were called gandy dancers, but it was hard work. They lived in boxcars and they moved from place to place as they worked on the Santa Fe line. So let's go on to the next slide. So I was trying to figure out why, when I was growing up, we always had a bottle of soy sauce on the table. I didn't question it till I got older, and it's like, man, so I lived with my parents and my grandmother lived with us. And I had 2 bachelor uncles that would come over for dinner every night. They had their own little houses or apartments, but they'd always come over and have dinner at my grandma's house. But we always had a bottle of soy sauce. So, and I still find it unusual if I don't have a bottle of soy sauce around. Well, I went back through the Clearwater, Kansas Historical Society records, and I found out that there were still Chinese working on the railroad in Clearwater. With the Exclusion Act in 1882, and then when it made them, it was Chinese immigration became permanently illegal in 1902. There weren't very many Chinese left in Kansas, but there still were some, and they were living in the boxcars on the railroad like the Mexican families were. So when my grandmother got to Kansas, the only thing available to her was this blue rose type rice, or what we call now Calrose rice, and this is what I cook with. Now, if you know anything about Mexican rice, and you're going to hear a lot about Mexican rice during this hour, Mexican rice is typically made with long grain rice. Well, not in my family. We use short grain or medium grain rice. And I love it, and I'm used to cooking with it. So I know that that came from that influence from the time that they were living in Kansas. My grandparents were living in Kansas. The bottle of soy sauce, well, that came along with it too. You know, you're going to eat whatever there is, whatever there's available. And they learned to use soy sauce on their rice, just like the Chinos did when they were living in Kansas. So this is what I grew up with. So in 1908, 1909, the family decided to leave Kansas. By the way, the photo that you saw, let me go back to the other slide. So the photo that you see on the bottom of the slide of the people that are by the boxcars, those are the boxcar, that's a boxcar housing that these people were living in. These are the families that my grandparents left behind. So somebody took a picture of this the day that they left Kansas. And we have that in the family collection. I think it's a great photograph. So they decided to they moved back to Texas, and my grandfather got a job working on a ranch in Lorain, Texas. So Lorain is a cattle town. And that's all it is. And that's all it was back in the day. It was ranches and a lot of cows. So my grandfather was working, laying fence there, and he injured himself. He broke his collarbone. They were living on a tent on the rancher's property. So my grandmother started making tortillas so that my two very young uncles, young boys, would go and they'd sell to the other workers there. They'd go into town and they'd sell to people in town. So this is how they survived during the time that my grandpa was recuperating. And it was also during this time that the rancher's wife, making signs. She didn't speak Spanish, so she's making signs to my grandmother, come into my kitchen. My grandmother went and she taught her how to bake bread. So my grandmother learned how to bake bread, and in turn, she taught the rancher's wife how to make tortillas. So you begin this exchange of recipes, and people are starting to, get curious about things. And the rancher's wife was so grateful that she gave my grandmother some butter that she had just churned. And my grandmother would always tell my mom this story, and my mom would tell me in turn and say, I don't know what to do with this butter. So she said, the only thing I could do was put it in the pot of beans that I was cooking. And that's what she did. She wasn't used to using any butter. So it's interesting how people's, taste change and the things that they do as far as cooking changes. So my grandfather received a letter from his cousin in Riverside and said, hey, come to California. There's a lot of work. We have a lot of oranges. We need pickers, come to California and spend some time with us. So the family decided to move. They ended up in Riverside, stayed there for a few years. And then in 1912, they decided to make the move to Fillmore because they had compadres and friends here. And they heard that there was a lot of work in the fields. Well, what was growing in Ventura County in that time? Lima beans, lots and lots of lima beans. And the citrus industry is just beginning to take off. So there was a lot of work during that time. And I have a quote at the bottom of the page that was from Charles Johnson, who's a colleague of mine, and he was past director of the museum's library. And he said, the food came with the people. The diet came with whoever was here. It was impacted by what crops were available and what they could grow here. And that was very true, because my mother says she remembers eating a lot of lima beans after she was born, and she was born in Fillmore right after they got here. So when the family lived in the bottom in Fillmore, and it's at the house that you see in the bottom right of the screen. That's the first house that they had. But before that, they were living on, when they first came to Fillmore, they were living in a labor camp along Pole Creek. And it was called La Cucaracha. Cardboard and tin shanties, that's what they were living in. Sometime in 1912, they weren't there very long. Sometime in 1912, 1913, there was a big flood in Fillmore, and it flooded up the banks of the River Rose, and it ended up destroying the labor camp. So they moved into town with some relatives that they had there already. And then eventually they moved into this house. My grandfather worked picking lima beans and then went on to pick oranges, as did my uncles, who were grown by then. So they saved their money, and he found a lot that was on the corner of Mountain View and Main Street. Any of you that know Fillmore, it is again an empty lot there. But he built his grocery store there. And in the early 1920s, and in the basement of that, he built a basement in the grocery store. We don't have basements very much in California, but he built a basement, and in that basement, he built a social hall. And the mutualistas, or mutual aid organizations that were in Fillmore, would meet there. Very important to the barrio, very important to the community during that time. So the store served as the community by selling products from home, as well as local products here, and also by creating a space that they could meet in. So that was a really good thing. By the early 1930s, after the Depression, my grandfather was a nice man. He gave credit to everyone. So because of that, the family lost the store. So everybody went back to work in the fields. So that's just a little bit about my family. So let's talk a little bit about food. So what's happening during this time? Well, prior to my grandparents arriving in California, there was a lot going on. So you have the Ortega adobe, which was in Ventura. So Emilio Ortega was the 11th child of Emilio and Maria Concepcion Ortega. The Ortega adobe is still standing. It's on the west side of Ventura, just before you get to the Ventura River, and it's a tiny little rundown building. So the Ortega family was living there. Emilio, as the 11th child, decided that they needed to do something to earn money for the family. So he went to New Mexico and he learned about fire roasting chiles. He comes back in the 1880s and he brings the process back to Ventura. They start fire roasting there in the adobe in his mother's kitchen. And by 1899, he has an outbuilding next to the adobe and he calls it the Pioneer Chili Company. And this is the beginning of the Ortega Chili Company. And if any of you go to Vaughn's or other grocery stores, you'll see those Ortega chilies there. There's Ortega chili salsa, but the green chilies diced or whole, and I still buy them, are really great for using in cooking. So that started in Ventura. For those of you that didn't know, we had, this is a major industry in Ventura, and it occupied at the beginning only 16 people, and then it grew from there. But what an amazing thing. And I keep reading the stories on the city website, and it talks about the Spanish chili salsas that they're making. These are not Spanish, these are Mexican. We need to change those things. So I have to talk to somebody at the city and make those changes. These things really irritate me. But and also the fact that they refer to the Ortega family as these great, they were wonderful Spanish families working for the Spanish government, blah, 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 blah. So I said, okay, let me do a little research on this. I'm sorry, but Emilio's father is from Guanajuato, and the mother was from Loreto in Baja California. So don't tell me these be Spanish people. These are Mexican people that are doing this. So this is important to know that, there's a lot of times that our culture kind of gets shoved aside because it's more, and you'll find out more about this, it's more romantic to be Mexican than it is to be Spanish than it is to be Mexican. So here we have a picture. This is in, let me see if I can get a date for you on this one. This has been in the museum collection for a long time. This is in 1890. This is one of the oldest photographs that we have in the collection. So let me read you what it says on the old catalog card. The catalog card attached to the photo said, this is the old Camarillo adobe. So for those of you that didn't know, the Camarillo family, that's Adolfo Camarillo that started the city of Camarillo, lived in Ventura first. And this is the old Camarillo adobe. This is Old Camarillo adobe Spanish Quarter. This is the Spanish quarter of town, which is not the Spanish quarter. These are the Mexicanos. Main Street and Ventura Avenue. So this is right across where I work at the museum. The adobe buildings, there's on the far right, you could see the word Restaurante Mexicano there. This is a restaurant that served the Indian community and the Mexican community that lived in the area. Whites are not going into the Spanish Quarter. This was also known as Indian Town and Mexican Town. This restaurant more than likely served very inexpensive food, maybe some soups, some caldos, some cocidos, different types of soup, and very, very hearty fare and very inexpensive. So it's an interesting thing that this is one of the first, probably the first restaurant in Ventura County. Okay, food as a tool, the mission revival and the real estate boom. Okay, this is a really complicated thing. So okay, mission revival movement. It started with the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The missions built in the 1700s are beginning to go into decay. What to do? How do you? How can we keep this impression of a romantic California lifestyle? Well, it started with the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the White City, as it was called. So they had some of the buildings from the California part of it were in this mission revival style. And there were two men back in California, in Los Angeles, Charles Lummis, who was a journalist, and Colonel Harrison Gray Otis, who was the publisher of the LA Times. And they decided that they wanted to reinvent the cultural legacy of California. This had been on their minds since the Columbian Exposition happened. So why did they want to do this? Because they want to bring people into California. Are there people in California? Are there people in Los Angeles? Are there people in Ventura County? Yes. but they're Mexican and they're Indian. They don't want to associate with these people. They want Midwesterners here. So they're going to sell this in the paper, creating ads, doing all kinds of stuff to get people to come to California. The palm trees, the wonderful climate. So what they're doing is the Anglo community is usurping the style, the culture, and the food of our people. This is what's happening in Los Angeles. But there's something that they're very worried about, and that's the fact that the Mexicanos, the people that are living around Olvera Street and in the downtown area of Los Angeles, have these little restaurants and tamale stands and taco stands, and they're just not, they're too dirty and they're too ugly, so that they've decided that they're not only going to change the facades of the buildings, and they're not only going to make this, they're going to make the food more palatable to American tastes and Midwestern tastes. So they begin a cleanup of these restaurants, and they begin to change some of the food items on some of the menus, and they begin to convince some restaurateurs that they need to make some changes. And some are deciding on their own that, oh, hey, you know, if I want Anglos in my restaurant, I'm gonna make some changes. So they start serving Americanized Mexican food. Chili salsas begin to be watered down. Add a little tomato sauce, add a little water, add a little chicken broth or whatever. And they're going to offer not only Spanish rice, never Mexican rice, remember, Spanish rice, or you have the option of having spaghetti. Now, I don't know what I would do if I saw spaghetti on the menu in a Mexican restaurant. I don't know if I've ever had, maybe I have, I don't know. And then besides tortillas, you could have bread, not bolillos, but just white bread. So this is how this is changing, because Spanish is European and very romantic, and Mexican is considered dirty and greasy. So what happens? They have an influx of people coming into Los Angeles. A lot of Midwesterners start coming this way, go west. Everybody's coming west. What's happening in Ventura County? Well, locally, we have something called Old Spanish Days that was started in 1924 by Mexicanos, by Spanish people in Santa Barbara, no, by Anglos. This was all started by Anglos, because again, here we are, we're romanticizing the myth. We want to bring people into Santa Barbara, not only Midwesterners to come and live there, but they want the tourist industry. And that has continued for years and years. If you look at Old Spanish Days, a fiesta in Santa Barbara, up to this point in time, it's Anglos that run this. It's Anglos that do this. And as my colleague Charles Johnson said, maybe if you're one of those Mexicans, you can participate. You know, maybe they'll let you be a part of it just to get, you know, a Latino name in there somewhere. But this is what was happening. So again, this is appropriation of our culture. And in Ventura, you have Rosa Ramirez making enchilada sauce out of her kitchen. She lives off Ventura Avenue. She's making enchiladas, and she has this amazing sauce. And her neighbors are telling her, amiga, you need to do something with this, because this is terrific. I've never had any better enchilada sauce. So she goes to her friend, Mr. Farad, who has a general store on Ventura Avenue and Main Street, again, right by the museum. And she says, hey, you know what? I think we can do something with this. So all of a sudden, her husband, Ralph, and Frank Farad decide to get together, and they start Ramirez and Farad, and eventually sell to Las Palmas Chile and become Las Palmas Chile Company. And if you look at the two palms that are on the label, those were in front of the mission in Ventura. And the little adobe that's there was on a street that no longer exists next to the museum called Colombo Street. That no longer on the new Las Palmas label, but it's there. It was there. And as you can see by their ad, it's, you know, enchiladas americana, you know, that's it. And it's Spanish sauce. Again, if you look at the other label on the opposite side, on the lower right, it says, you know, these are Spanish sauces or Spanish recipes, because Mexican doesn't exist yet. So again, we have again, this is a watering down of Mexican culture and foods. So let's talk about rice. I told you we'd be talking a lot about rice, and I don't even have rice cooking today. I just finished cooking my pot of beans. I'm here in my kitchen and my beans are on the stove and I'm staying warm. So back in the day, Mexican food wasn't well received by the Anglos living in the area. Mexican restaurants, owners, and business people had to find a way of making this more palatable, and that's why I told you we have Spanish rice. And it became Spanish rice because Mexican is a dirty word. But what's interesting to me is that this is continued and exacerbated throughout the decades. Spanish rice is still on the menu. My mother called her rice Spanish rice for years. I kept correcting her and she finally stopped. It's a funny thing because my husband and I have kind of been on this kick about the rice and stuff, and we look for restaurants and we look for Facebook posts about Spanish rice, and he comes down hard. It's like, this is not Spanish rice. This is not paella, excuse me. This is Mexican rice, arroz a la mexicana. So, and it's interesting that Taco Bell does not sell Spanish rice. They sell Latin rice. And we've seen that as well. So keep your eye out for some things like this, because honestly, this is Mexican rice. This is Mexican rice.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in and just say
yeah,
something just to help connect
Anytime.
everything? Thank you. Yeah, so y'all just take point of that, because this is part of the an example of like ethnic cleansing, right? Like even through our food, even through the way that we speak, even through our last names, like everything is so Spanish. And I've had so many experiences in which people say, oh yeah, my relatives from the past, they came from Spain, they're Spanish. And, you know, so we have linked to Spain. Like there's so many people who have said that, but it's very, very rare where I hear people say, oh yeah, I have indigenous ancestors that come from such and such place, right? Everybody always gravitates, not everyone, but a lot of people, they want to gravitate towards the Spanish part of our heritage. And it's not to deny it, but when you look at the whole picture, and that historically we've had to deal with a lot of ethnic cleansing, right? And the erasure of our indigeneity and who we are as a people, then that's when it becomes problematic, right? And so this, if you look at through all this through a critical lens, the way Anna is presenting, then you're going to be able to read the world around you, right? And you'll be able to notice these things when Old Spanish Days in Santa Barbara comes up. Like you'll be able to question that now. It's like, why do they call it Old Spanish Days, right? Why is it that? What happened to just fiestas, because fiestas are Mexicano, but now it's Old Spanish Days, right? Or they flip back and forth just depending on what the cultural political atmosphere is like. So there are all these things, and like Taco Bell, we never really question like, why do they call it Latin rice, right? And just like I had spoken to you all at the very beginning of the semester when we went through all these different terms of our identities, Hispanic, Latinx, all of these things where the emphasis is always on our European roots. And I think I asked you all how many of you were born and raised in Europe. I don't think anybody raised their hand. And then when I asked how many of you identify as indigenous, you didn't raise your hand either, although we were born and raised here on the indigenous land of our ancestors, right? So this ethnic cleansing, even through the food and all these other ways that permeate through society, really, we have really internalized it to the point where we don't know how to reconnect and identify with our indigenous abuelitas, so that's real. This is real. And so we have to be able to pick it up and analyze it in everything that is around us. So I really appreciate this conversation, Anna.
Oh, thank you. I have to just share a personal thing that happened to us a few years ago. So I have a cousin who lives in Canton, Ohio. Is married to an Anglo living in Canton, Ohio, the heart of the Bible Belt. And we were having a family celebration there a few years ago, and he had caterers come in to serve the food. And it was these, and I hate to say, these Anglo women, very, very sweet, very nice, all in their bouffant beehive hairdos, y todo. And so, I went into the kitchen and said hello. We're sitting in the living room, and then after a while, I hear them, and one of them called him into the kitchen, but I could hear. I was in the dining room, and he said, Mr. Strauss, I didn't know your wife's family was Spanish. And he looked at it and goes, they're not, they're Mexican. So she just stopped talking immediately and just went back to work. But it's so funny how, and you know, that's, it's not uncommon in the Midwest that they're still considering us Spanish people. You know, they don't look at us as Mexicanos or Latinos, we're Spanish.
Mm.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so family gardens, very common in the early part of the century, 1920s, 19 teens and 20s, 30s. Families, everybody, you know, you brought your, I remember my grandmother saying, oh, me traje mis semillitas, you know, I brought my seeds from Mexico and my little, you know, a little bundle that she had with her. People started planting gardens. Why? Well, you're in the barrio. You have to survive. There's a way that you need to survive. So you bring your seeds with you, you plant them, you start cuttings, you know, you start little plants, somebody gives you something else and you share, you trade. People share fruit, they share vegetables that they planted. So you're building a community, you're staying stronger, you're feeding each other, because there's times when that's all you have to eat, that and maybe some tortillas and maybe a little bit of beans. But you're sharing the bounty with everyone. So home vegetable gardens were extremely important during this time. And unfortunately, post-World War II, a lot of those home gardens started going away. And that's really unfortunate because as you'll see at the end of my talk, during pandemic times, these gardens have come back because it's so important to have that connection to the earth and to your culture. And it's so funny. Well, I'll talk about it later, but yes, I plant a lot of what my grandmother planted in the garden. So let's go on and see what we have here. Yeah, so here's the Holy Trinity for my family anyway. Oregano, mejorana, and tomillo, as my grandmother said, oregano, marjoram, and thyme. This is the Holy Trinity, the bouquet garni of the Mexicans, you know, your little herb that you put in everything. Pozole, you put it in your menudo. My grandmother put it in her albóndigas. This is the thing. You notice there's no cilantro in here. There's nothing like that because you know what? Cilantro was not popular during this time. Cilantro didn't come into being until way later on. So this is your Holy Trinity. Anybody want recipes? You email me, I'll send you some recipes. Okay, the barrio was a refuge for everyone. So in the barrio in Fillmore, the barrio in Fillmore was divided into two parts. There was a barrio santo and the barrio de las flores, the holy barrio and the barrio of flowers. The barrio de las flores had a lot of beautiful gardens with roses and flowers. On the other side of the tracks was a barrio santo, and there were several churches on that side. So it was kind of that's why they called it the Barrio Santo or the Holy Barrio. So for the residents, who lived there? Well, anybody that wasn't white. Because if you didn't look like that, you didn't live in anywhere near this, inside the city, you lived in the barrio. So if you were Chinese, that's where you lived. If you were Japanese, you lived in the barrio. You're Mexican, of course. If you were Syrian, you lived in the barrio. If you were Greek, you lived in the barrio. And these were my grandmother's neighbors. They were Greeks, Syrians, Chinese, and Japanese. So there was a variation in cuisine. There was pita in the barrio in the 1920s and 30s. The Rabani family lived in the barrio in Fillmore, and my grandmother learned how to make pita bread, or as she called it, the biggest tortillas that she ever saw. So she learned how to make pita bread. And she, you know, these people were getting along. So you're sharing cultures, you're sharing stuff. You know, you're making your burritos on pita bread, and then you give them the small tortillas, and they're making corn tortillas with, you know, they're making their food with corn tortillas, sharing with corn tortillas as well. And then there's the Chinese and the Japanese. The Inadomi family were very close to my grandparents. They both had markets on opposite ends of the same block. My grandfather helped take care of their market while they went to the concentration camps, to the internment camps in World War II. But so they're sharing their cooking. And again, rice is coming up. I tell you, this is all about the rice. So white rice, soy sauce again. So what does my grandmother make? Well, all of a sudden she's making all these dishes with white rice as well. And then there's Chinese residents in the barrio. So I grew up having what I call Mexican fried rice. So you make your rice, you have your rice for dinner one night. The following morning, rice is so good the next day because the flavors are enhanced. So you take your eggs, you scramble your eggs in the pan, you add your rice, scramble it a little bit more, you add some little green onions, and you have Mexican fried rice. And I grew up eating this. So, you know, I can't help but think that this was influenced by the Asian neighbors that my grandparents had. And the need to assimilate. So in Santa Paula, we have the Terrazas family. Jesus Terrazas moved to Santa Paula early on in the century. And their family owned this place called the Sanitary Bakery. And it's interesting because we have a copy of the calendar in the collection at the museum. And it says on the calendar, it's interesting, Sanitary Bakery. Think about that name, sanitary. It was clean. It had to be clean for Anglos to buy food, anything there. Sanitary Bakery. Nuestro pan mexicano es el mejor y más limpio de la ciudad. Our Mexican bread is the best and cleanest in the city. He ain't saying that for the Mexicans that live there. He's telling everybody else, come to my bakery because we're clean and sanitary and we make good bread. Not only is he making Mexican bread, pan dulce and bolillos and that, but he's making, if you look at the recipes, because we have a ledger book with all the recipes, he's making, this one says lemon cookies, C-U-K-I-S, cookies, fruit cookies, and I can't read the third one, and then coffee cake corriente, simple coffee cake. So he's cooking for that community. He isn't just cooking for the Mexicanos that are living in Santa Paula. He's cooking for the whole city. He's baking for this city. Unfortunately, on March 12, 1928, the St. Francis Dam broke its bank. It failed and the bakery was lost. The only thing that survived, the ledger book with all the recipes. And we have it in the museum collection. And nothing is destroyed. It's not even, the ink did not run, and it was in a pie safe that was in the bakery, which is a wooden piece of furniture with tin doors. But it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing that was left to us, this legacy of this bread. And this man who sought to assimilate and to create food, baked goods, not just for the Mexican community, but for everyone else. Okay, so the 1940s, a tragic time, especially in Ventura County. A lot of people going to war, World War II, a lot of young men from the Barrio leaving and never coming back. My grandfather died in the 40s, so there was a loss in our family as well. So what happens? There's a loss in the family. My mother's, my grandmother's family is growing, and she's only got a couple of daughters left that aren't married, and she has two nieces that were left to her that she has to raise. So she's got to make some money because there is no money coming in. So what does she do? She has to find a way to make some business. So one of my uncles who has a grocery store in Peru finds her a tortilladora, a tortilla making machinery. So she decides she's got to go mainstream. She's got to do something. So she makes the tortillas from scratch, which is a very big word and very becoming more and more popular nowadays. So she's starting with a raw corn, and she's adding the cal, and she's making everything in the backyard and then bringing everything in. She had next to our house, there was a garage that had an apartment, and it also had a large room that was empty. So she set up the tortilla machinery in there, and between my mother and another daughter and my two cousins, her two nieces that were living with her at the time, they started this cottage industry. The apron that you see is the apron that she wore when she would be out making her masa. So she would run the tortillas through the press. She would get the corn, grind it, run it through the press to make the corn tortillas, and she began selling to neighbors. And pretty soon she began selling to the local grocery stores. And my uncle would take the tortillas to his store in Peru. And then he knew the people that had grocery stores in Santa Paula. They started going to Santa Paula. Pretty soon, they started selling in markets all over Ventura County. So not only is her product going to the Barrio and the local Mexican community, but it's going everywhere.
Do you know the name, what name it was under, the product?
He didn't even have a name. They were just selling them así, just packaged, no name to it or anything. So, but it's a wonderful thing that they're not just going to other Mexicanos, but they're going out there and Anglos are buying her tortillas. Everybody's buying her tortillas. So it's a really good thing. And it got her through a really rough time period. She stopped making these into her 80s. So in the 1960s, I was little, and I remember I had to help my dad stir the cal and the corn outside under a big wood fire. But it was an interesting thing. This tortilladora is now at the Smithsonian. So it's really a proud moment for our family. So post World War II, during World War II, you have jobs for women. Men are gone. There are jobs in the munitions plant. There was Bermite was a factory in Newhall that made ammunition. So there were a lot of people from Ventura County, from the east end of Ventura County that went there, from Fillmore, Piru, Santa Paula. They would work at Bermite. But post World War II, what is left for people to do, for women to do? The braceros are there. Men are coming back from war. What is left for the women? Well, in the town of Fillmore and Piru and Santa Paula, the only thing you could get if you were a woman of color, and I stress that word color, you could get a job at the packing house or you could clean houses. That's what you did. My mother started work at the packing house. She used to get colds easily, and the packing houses are very cold. So she went to housework. It's not what she wanted to do. She always wanted to teach, but she had to, my grandmother pulled her out of school because she needed her to work. And in her senior year in high school, she started doing housework for other people. That's my mother in the middle on the right, and two of her friends. All of them were domestics in Fillmore. So this is what you did. If you could pass and you were light-skinned and you had some skills, you might be able to find jobs in a dress shop or as a secretary. Those were few and far between, especially in small towns and cities. Okay, so what happens? Well, those women, and this is what I'm working on right now, those women that went to work as housekeepers were called the girls. They were always the girls. They were never women, they were the girls. So they were asked, they worked long hours. My mother worked 10-hour days and for very little money. She'd start very early in the morning. She had to take care of the children, get them ready for school or take care of them if they didn't go to school, clean the house, do all the housework, and she cooked. So she had to learn how to make Mexican food that was palatable. So she had to make her enchiladas, again, watered down. My mother's use of tomato sauce was amazing. So she watered down her enchilada sauce. She'd make, the typical tostadas, tacos, and Spanish rice, of course. But the interesting thing is there's an exchange happening too, because my grandmother is still alive and she's asking her, Mija, what are the ladies making? What kind of food are they making? Bring some recipes home. Let's try some new things. So my mother is taking recipes from these women as well. So what is she doing? She's this one dish that I still have the recipe card for. It's called Viva la Chicken. What's interesting. So it was one of the patronas, one of her boss's recipes for chicken tortilla casserole. And we've all seen chicken tortilla casseroles, and some of them are not half bad. This is one that I do actually like. And then there's the Jello salad, as you see the picture there, and lemon pie. My mother got a recipe from a local teacher that she used to work for lemon cream pie. And to her dying day, she's still, and I make it now, was always called Aunt Mary's lemon cream pie, and it's a fantastic pie. So there was an exchange. So we're starting to, incorporate and mix recipes together. Jello salad, I could not tolerate. Jello is a horrible thing. That's a whole other lecture I could do on just Jello salad. And my mother, bless her heart, I used to be jealous of my friends whose mothers would put fruit in Jello salad, because my mother would put everything in Jello. Lime Jello with aguacate, avocado, and shrimp, and pimento olives. She did it all, tomates, tomatoes. She put everything in a Jello salad. Man, so I'm not a fan of Jello or Jello salad. So the 60s and the ultimate colonization of the Mexican diet. So in my family and others around us, I'm seeing, I look back and I see what's happening. So we're trying to desegregate ourselves. In Fillmore at the time, track houses are coming up in the 1960s. Track houses happened post World War II, but our county was a little late in getting this to happen. So in the 1960s, Fillmore has its first tract of homes, and the Mexicanos are starting to Anglo neighbors. They don't want to be, it's a shame, or it's shameful to live in the barrio. You don't want to live in the barrio anymore. My family stayed in the barrio. But there's attempts to desegregate yourself. And so there's this flight out of the barrio. People are leaving. This picture that you have here, of course, the track homes here on the left and on the right. This is a picture, a family picture that we have at Thanksgiving at my grandmother's house in the 1960s. There's rolls and salad. There's beer in a bucket that I can see. And then there's, of course, turkey and there's mashed potatoes on the table. There was nothing Mexican, nothing at all. I mean, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving anymore. So this is interesting for me to look at, that there was nothing on this table. So we are really trying to assimilate. We're trying to become what we really don't want to become. So, and here we go. There's an expression that we used to use, and I still use it once in a while. My mother used it all the time. It's called getting all high tone. High tone means you were trying to be all that, you know. You were, and in the barrio, you didn't used to pronounce it as high tone. You say high ton. Ay que high tone, you know. Oh, that lady, she's all high tone, high tona. So you're struggling to assimilate. We want to be, we want to be Americans. So this is actually a 25th anniversary celebration in somebody's home, not in the barrio. This is family and friends of my parents. And the menu was ham, scalloped potatoes, green salad. They had cocktails. Scotch was a preferred alcohol of choice, and champagne and cake. Again, nothing Mexican about it, even though it was a 25th anniversary for my tios. You're trying desperately to assimilate. And if you notice on the front left of this photograph, there's an Anglo man. And next to him is a woman in a blue dress. That's my cousin, and this is her husband. He was one of the first Anglos in our family. So it's interesting. So people are intermarrying already. And it was a big deal. They had to come and ask permission for my grandmother to get married. So it was an interesting situation. Interesting times. Okay, so we have Hollywood's influence. So 1966, Alan Hooker is a man that comes to Ojai, the Ojai Valley. He sets up a house in Ojai and decides that he's going to start a restaurant. He's a vegetarian. He's not quite sure how his food is going to go over. And so he decides, after a few failed attempts, that he has to vary his menu. He doesn't like serving meat, but he's interested in Mexican cooking. So he goes to some of the local Mexican cooks in Ojai, and he asks how to prepare certain foods. Of course, the first thing that he asks about are enchiladas, very typical enchiladas. So, and I don't know if this woman was just wanted him off her back or what, but she told him how to make enchiladas. So he gets all set up in the kitchen. He's making his enchiladas, and he can't get the tortillas to roll up. So he keeps trying, and it's not rolling. So he goes to somebody else that he knows, and he says, look, I've been trying to make enchiladas. What am I doing wrong? And she says, you got to heat the tortillas. And you can heat them on the burner, or you can heat them on a skillet, or you can fry them in a little bit of oil. So he realizes that this woman just didn't want to have anything to do with him because she wanted him to fail. So he finally got the enchiladas right. And all of a sudden his restaurant takes off. Hollywood is in Ojai. They love it. Great food, beautiful setting, everything else. So he's beginning to introduce new ingredients, and he sets up this herb garden outside of his restaurant. In his restaurant, if you've ever been to the ranch house, is mostly outdoors. It has one room that's indoors, and it has an herb garden down down a few steps in the back of the garden, back of the restaurant. So he gets a visit one day from Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn, who is an actor, I don't know, some of you may not have heard of him, some of you may. So Anthony Quinn tells him, he goes, "Hey, have you ever tried cilantro?" And he says, "I don't even know what that is." And he says, "Is it like this?" And he goes to the garden, he picks a plant and he brings it back. And Anthony Quinn says, "No, that's not cilantro." And what he gave him was an herb called culantro, which is very common in Costa Rica, but it's not, it's a stronger taste than cilantro. So Anthony Quinn brings him some coriander seeds, some cilantro seeds, and Alan Hooker plants them in his restaurant, and he begins using cilantro. So you see, it's not really until this time that we start seeing cilantro in cooking, and it's still not as popular as it starts to get in the 70s and the 80s. So the braceros, this is not chronological, I know, but I wanted you to know about the braceros. I'm just going to take a sip of water. And how the braceros brought back the authentic taste of Mexican food. So the braceros came in during World War II. As you have, men leaving for war, somebody's got to pick crops. Somebody has to do a lot of the jobs that the men couldn't do. Women could take some on. But in the fields, you start this guest worker program, and the braceros start coming in the 1940s. And the braceros stay through 1963, and some stayed on even longer. This photograph in the background is a photograph of a bracero picnic in the late 1950s. So what happens? Well, my dad, who came in as a bracero, used to say, he came to Yuba City in Northern California, Central California. When he first came into the United States, he was in a camp that was run by Sikhs. And every day, every morning, he had hot cakes for breakfast. Well, after he was married and I was born, he could not stand to see another pancake or hot cake on his plate because he'd had them every single morning. At first, it was a novelty. After a while, you kind of get sick of it. And my dad's work, my dad worked for the packing houses in Fillmore and Ventura. So he used to take out, when he first started, he started taking out a group of pickers, a cuadrilla, as they call it. He would take cuadrillas out into the field to pick. They were the pickers. They would pick oranges, lemons, grapefruits, what have you. And my father got to see what they were given to eat in the labor camps. And he would bring it home so we could see what they were eating. So the men were given tacos for their lunch. What it was basically was a corn tortilla folded in half. It had a thin strip of some ungodly looking meat with chile on it, or it had a thin little line of beans, chili on it. And by the time these men, even though these were in containers that were supposed to keep the food hot, it was cold. So what my dad started doing was he started getting my mom up early in the morning and make all these burritos. So my mom would make all these burritos and she goes, "I don't know what you're doing." He goes, "I just give them, just don't ask questions, woman, just do it." So she would make all these burritos. He would take them to work and he would trade them a taco for a burrito made at home. And this is, and he would bring these home and he would have us eat them because he said, this is what they're eating in the field. This is not good food. This is not substantial for these men. But so what a lot of the braceros started to do, and my dad was one of them, and my dad was an excellent cook, was they started to cook. They started to cook for themselves. And then they started to marry some of these women that were there, as my father did. My father taught my mother how to cook Mexican food. She was born in Fillmore, so she really didn't know a lot about Mexican cooking. And I could tell a lot of my uncles who were braceros did the same thing. So they were teaching their wives to cook authentic Mexican dishes. And it was amazing because long before corn fungus became popular in high-end Mexican restaurants, my father was using this at home. Wheat lacoche was something that they ate in Mexico. Squash blossom quesadillas, same thing. We had them way before we were popular. So these men were bringing back an authenticity to Mexican food that had been gone for a long time. And all of a sudden, people were starting to notice and they liked it. So in Ventura, again, across the street from the museum, Richard Ortega has Ortega's Tortilla Shop. And he starts this in the 1950s, along with another little restaurant that he had in Ojai. And all of a sudden, he has this idea that he's going to try these little taquitos. He tells his wife and his two daughters, "I'm going to try these little taquitos. So I'm gonna refry some beans, roll them up in a corn tortilla, deep fry them, and let's see how they sell." So the corn burrito is born. If you've heard of corn burritos, if you're a Ventura County resident, you probably have heard of corn burritos. If you're a Ventura resident, you better have heard of corn burritos. This is strictly Ventura County. You will not find a corn burrito outside of the county. So what happens? Well, he wants to get back to his tortillas and enchiladas and tamales. So he's going to keep making corn burritos, but other people are taking notice. All of a sudden, the guy that owns Foster Freeze is taking notice, and he wants to know how to make these. There's another family that owns a drive-in called Merle's Drive-In, 2 locations in Ventura that begin to notice this as well. So all of a sudden, he's sending his 2 daughters, Jerry and Jackie, to these drive-ins to teach them how to roll corn burritos. And all of a sudden, it's taking off all over. It's so big right now that they have an I Love Corn Burritos a Facebook page that I'm a member of. And I've talked to my friend Gustavo Arellano, who you may know is a wonderful journalist and writer for the LA Times now. And I told him, hey, you should do a corn burrito contest in Ventura County. He's all for it. As soon as this pandemic is over, we're going to get this going. So this is something that happened that's strictly Ventura County. It can't be found you won't find this anywhere outside of Ventura County. So we have Americanized Mexican food, of course. So menus, they're still coming up as Americanized food. This is an old menu from Ernesto's restaurant in Ventura. And although the menu items are not strictly Americanized, you have like chile verde, carne con chile colorado, a taco dinner, tamales, beef enchilada. So tamales, tacos, and enchiladas were the typical menus that you'd have in a lot of these restaurants. And of course, you had the Dayglow orange cheese and refried beans and rice, and that was about it. This is a Seroptimist's organization recipe book over here on the right. So you see they have skillet Spanish rice, a tamale pie, enchilada bake. So these Anglo women are making their variations of some of the recipes that they were taught by their ladies. So I want to go back a little bit. So as I told you, the domestics or the housekeepers were known as the girls. And the ladies that they worked for were known as las patronas. So if you notice, the National Charity League has an auxiliary known as las patronas, who are always in charge of the debutante ball every year in Ventura. So this is where this comes from. These women were clearly the boss. They wanted to make sure that was known. Totally local, man. So, it's so nice that right now we're going back to local foods, and it's great to buy local because it's bringing money. It keeps money in the community. So what I have here are some of the top crops in Ventura County. We have avocados, tomatoes, cabbage, cilantro is one as well. Lemons, of course, always. Raspberries and strawberries, of course, are always huge in Ventura County. But there's a lot of herbs that are being grown now, and chiles, of course. So this is great because it provides us with more opportunities to bring authentic foods to our table. Oaxaca comes to Ventura County. At the end of the Bracero program, the Mixtecos began arriving from Oaxaca. I did not realize until I did research that it was that early on. In 1994, you have the bigger migration of Mixtecos into the county and a smaller number of Zapotecos as well, due to NAFTA and then the devaluation, of course, of the Mexican peso. So what's happening is Oaxacan food is becoming a part of the Mexican food scene in Ventura County. There's a lot of Oaxacan restaurants popping up. When I met my husband in 1979, and he took me home to dinner, his mother, who was born and raised in Oaxaca, had this marvelous dinner for us. I had no idea what I was eating. I didn't recognize any of the foods at all. I mean, we didn't eat a lot of black beans at home. Clayudas, definitely not. So it was an amazing, and her mole was to die for. These wonderful moles. So they're bringing such a rich culture of cuisine to our county right now. And Oaxacan is so big. If I didn't bring my snack with me today, but if I did, I would have had my little bowl of chapulines right here that I absolutely love.
I
My
have some. I'm gonna have to go grab mine because I have some, and so I can show everyone.
I know. My grandkids think they taste like beef jerky. They love them. And then, of course, we have the supermarkets, supermercados coming up that bringing a variety of goods to market. We're not only finding Mexican foods here, we're finding foods from everywhere, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, everywhere. Vallarta markets, they're all over the place, and it's fantastic. And I like to take my colleagues from the museum on field trips here before the pandemic, because it's just so colorful and wonderful. You can find anything you want in these Latino markets. There's the chapulines. They're a great source of protein. They're delicious. They really are good. Thank you, Vero. So from panaderías to paleterias. So because of the influx of immigrants creating a greater need for more food related businesses, this is amazing. This is what we're getting. La Michoacana paleterias are popping up everywhere. There's a lot more. It used to be hard. When we were living in Fillmore, we would go to Oxnard to La Central for our pan dulce. We couldn't get it anywhere in Fillmore. It was really hard. Sometimes my uncle would get it at his store in Piru from Los Angeles, but it was pre-packaged. It just didn't taste that good. So we would have to drive all the way to Oxnard for our pan dulce. And now there's Mexican bakeries all over the county, and it's amazing. There's more non-native people that are seeking authentic food and pastries and treats like paletas. I love the paletas from the paleterias. They're so refreshing. And I know they're probably not that good for you, but I like to think they are because they have a lot of fresh fruit. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing and I'm waiting for this pandemic to be over so I can actually enjoy more of these foods and go to more of these places. So elevated Mexican cuisine. So there's been a rise in high-end Mexican restaurants and cocktails, cuisine, mezcal. There are mezcal bars everywhere you go. We go to San Francisco a lot because my daughter lives there. So there's always new restaurants popping up prior to the pandemic, of course. But the food of the poor, as I was telling you before about the, mezcal. Food of the poor is elevated to high cuisine. The huitlacoche, like I tell you, corn fungus, which people are considering the truffle of Mexico, flor de calabaza, squash blossoms, purslane, which I love and we eat all the time. Purslane, verdolagas, which are on menus. And street food, it's given a place at the table. You have esquites, tacos, pastor, all these caldos, birrias. This menu is from a place called Nopalito in San Francisco. I don't think you can see it, but it has a caldo tlalpeño, but you can see the esquites on there as well. Birria, you see birria on menus before. It was something very, for the masses, not so much for high-end restaurants. So it's amazing that these things are being elevated to high cuisine. I think it's great that our foods are being more respected and we're eating much better quality Mexican food than we were, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago.
And this menu actually says Mexican rice instead of Spanish rice.
Al fin, finally. So back to our roots, Ventura County in pandemic times. We've been looking at this for the Smithsonian, but once we went into quarantine. So I'll tell you a little bit about how our family is right now. My daughter had moved into us with us prior to the pandemic because she was saving money for her their first home. So I have my daughter, her husband, and 3 grandchildren living with my husband and myself. And my son also lives with us. So we are 8 people in a small house. And all of a sudden we're being told to quarantine and then we're in lockdown. It's been good, and it has its pros and cons. Pros, of course, we have people here that we can relate to, we can talk to, we can do whatever we can. You know, we have someone we're living with, we're not totally alone. So I love that part of it. But we have to make sure that we wash hands a lot and wipe down counters and everything a lot, because there's more of us here and more of us are going in different directions as well. But one of the very first things we did, probably in the first week of that extreme lockdown, was we started a garden, which we hadn't done in years. So, and we started eating from that garden, and we decided that we didn't want to, well, we couldn't go out. First of all, we didn't want to buy that many things. So we went back to basics. We got a big a bag of beans and rice, and we eat from our garden. We use the vegetables that are in our garden. We make salads, and we make guisados, and we make soups. So and the kids love it. We all work in the garden as a family, and it's a really great thing. So I see that with a lot more people. I think you do too, Hermana, on Facebook. Backyard and window gardens are huge. Even if you have a small yard, we have epazote growing back there. We have a lot of our native herbs, and I have my grandmother's Holy Trinity growing as well. And keeping meals simple. We want to keep meals simple. I don't know a lot about the decolonization diet yet, but I'm reading more about that. And it's an interesting thing that several of our family members are expressing interest in. I like the fact that we're eating less meat and we're wasting much less food than we used to before. So I think we need to, because of what's happening in our environment, what's happening to the planet, we need to change our diets to reflect more thoughtful, healthful eating habits. So let's see what we have. So oh my gosh, I'm talking so much. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's all great. We are at 4:08 in the class. This class session ends at 4:15. So I do want to be able to squeeze in a couple minutes of Q&A.
Okay. So, you know, so we're going to conclude. Mexican food continues to be a fusion of different cuisines from influences. We talked about that already. And Americanized Mexican food, not all that bad. If you like it, eat it. It's whatever you want to eat. You know, sometimes I have to have those nachos with a Dayglow orange cheese. And we create our own food culture. Mexican food's what you make it, from, I know, French fries and burritos to that Sinaloan Mexican sushi, which I love. And don't forget, we were putting avocado on tacos and toast before they started charging $10 for it in restaurants. That was from our people, our culture. And I just want to give a shout out to Victor Valle and his book, Recipe of Memory, Charles Nelson Johnson for his help in editing my text for this and for helping me to provide images to me. And of course, special thanks to my friend and compadre, Gustavo Arellano Miranda, for his book, Taco USA, because we have great conversations about food history, and tortillas. Thank you so much, all of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I mean,
You're welcome.
you know, I don't think people typically really take time to think about the impact of food, right? And how that represents, how it mirrors the social evolutions and all the political and social circumstances that are happening at the time. So it's just really interesting to look at our culture and our social circumstances historically through this lens of food. So I appreciate this conversation so much. Okay, folks, I don't want to steal your time. You have a couple minutes to ask some questions. So who wants to go first?
I have a question. So here in our class, our professor is encouraging us to attend cultural events. Do you have any for us that we could do, or just any recommendations what we could do?
Cultural events. If they're food related, I know about them. So it's really hard to say right now during the pandemic. So many things are not happening. If you want to attend something on Zoom, I suggest looking at Plaza de Cultura y Artes in Los Angeles. It's a great museum and a great organization. They have some great Zoom lectures. Mikey Gomez Rejon does a lot of food lectures on there about history, and not just Mexican food, but others as well. She's wonderful too. So look at Plaza de Cultura y Artes. There's not a lot of other things happening locally. Look at our museum website as well. I want to start we want to start a podcast on foods and also on the history of Ventura County. So if you're interested in that as well. One of the things that I've been really grateful for is that Veronica and her partner Gabriel came and spoke to our museum staff, where we are working hard to becoming an anti-racist institution. So you're going to find more things, I think, at the museum that are related to our local Latino culture. So check our website periodically as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great suggestions. Thank you. Thank you. Other questions?
Talking about the Spanish rice and the Mexican rice, that's something that really like stuck to me, because me growing up, I thought Spanish rice was Mexican rice. Like in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, the Spanish rice is Mexican rice, but in the European way, it kind of like it deframed it and it shifted it. And you explaining that to me, it's like a lot of European like scopes that's it did that for a lot of like, say, like music and fashion and just anything with the culture. It's just like I feel like the culture appropriation hasn't been accepted with our society. And you saying that about the Spanish rice is just proving the point that the European scope really overtook that, and it kind of took away from your culture. And I feel like that's something amazing that you're telling us, because I never knew that when I was growing up. And that was something like a shock to me, because every time I go to a restaurant, I'm like, hey, can I get the Mexican rice? But they're like, oh, do you want Spanish rice? Instead, I'm like, wait, isn't that the same thing? And they're like, no, it's Spanish rice. And that's when I'm like connecting it. I'm like, okay, yeah, what you're saying is something that's really true and it's really happening in the world. And I just wanted to point that out, because we should be taught these things at a young age to correct ourselves in the long run, because if we know the truth and we're teaching our children that, then I feel like more people will accept it instead of not just being like shadowed from it, from the world. And
right. Yeah. And think about it. It's in the 1920s is when this was the term was changed to Spanish rice. So think about it. This has been happening for 100 years and it's still ongoing.
Yeah, that's a major impact.
Yeah, that's a shocker to me. Like they still have dragged this on for so long.
Yes.
And
yeah. Okay, so we have time for one more question.
I had a question. Do you have a dish or a plate that you hold close to your heart?
Pardon me. I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you had to say.
Do you hold like a dish or a plate, like a recipe close to your heart?
It's the rice. Yeah, you know what? My mother made my grandmother's Mexican rice arroz, and I still think that my rice is absolutely the best. And it's all about the timing and being able to brown it to just the right, thing. So that stays with me, because it reminds me of my grandmother learning to cook with short grain rice from the Chinese. So yeah, that's pretty much the one that I hold dearest.
Beautiful. And then you had mentioned, I'm going to ask a question now. You had mentioned that you don't celebrate Thanksgiving anymore. Are you able to share why?
It's a colonial holiday, it's just like, and I'm the last one to talk, because my husband's ancestors came with Columbus on his voyage when he left Spain. So it's like, oh man, I don't even want to think about my Spanish ancestors right now. But yeah, it's become too Americanized for us. This year we're going up to San Francisco just to kind of just get away and reflect, and we'll probably grab a burrito or something in the Mission, and that's okay. We don't need to celebrate. We're trying to get away from some of these Anglo customs that were imposed on us.
Yeah. And I love and respect that, because we have to be critical in that, these holidays are a celebration of something that is based on a false story and ignores the genocide and all the suffering that our Native American brothers and sisters went through. So I appreciate that. And you all know me and how I am and how much I am very on this path to decolonizing, right? And I think that for me, I always struggle with Thanksgiving and even Christmas because it's so colonial, and then it's just based on money and false stories. So I've always struggled with that. But you know, my mom being elderly, it's important for me to just be there with her because it's a family tradition. But you know, it's not. It's if it were just completely up to me, and I didn't prioritize just coming together with family for the sake of my mom having us together, I wouldn't even celebrate it, just, you know, for that very reason. So I totally get it and understand. And I think that, you know, I also put in the chat, because when you brought up Thanksgiving, is that my effort in trying to decolonize it even a little bit, because at least turkey is a native food and the corn as well, is that I had my mom teach me how to make mole to go with the turkey instead of like gravy. So in that way, I was trying to decolonize our dishes. And, you know, of course, my siblings think I'm crazy, but that's okay. That's okay. So that's my way of trying to do that, you know, to try to keep it native as much as possible. So yeah, but
Turkey mole is great.
it is. And I loved it. And you know what? Everybody loved it, you know, but they had their choice. You could have the gravy or you could have, you know, the mole, but I was packing on that mole because it was bomb. But thank you so much. So yeah, I was kind of snacking here on my chapulines, but I'm still hungry because this is all just delicious food. And for all of you, just remember that cooking for your family is also like part of ceremonia, right? Part of that ceremony of showing your family love. It isn't so much like, oh, I have to cook and it's, you know, laborious, but it also comes from that tradition of creating a meal because you love your family, because it's healthier, right? And it's better to make that food at home than to agarrar, you know, comida de la calle, which is also delicious, but when you cook it from home, it's because you're making it with love. So just keep that in mind as well. But thank you so much. I'm going to let you all go ahead and unmute yourselves. You all know the drill, so you can say thank you and goodbye to Anna, and I'll see you all on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.